Sometimes you stumble upon these figures from history, and they seem, well, a world away, like characters in a story. But then you hear about someone like Rebbetzin Chana, and wow, it hits you. This isn't just some dry history lesson.
Yeah.
It's early 20th century Russia, exile, a life dedicated to service that most of us can't even fathom. And that's what we're delving into today, unearthing the woman behind the legacy. We're using excerpts from a biography of Rebbetzin Chana to really get to know her.
It's incredible, really. I mean, her story starts long before she's even born, right? I'm talking
Yeah.
a long line of, leading rabbis, a family steeped in scholarship, spiritual leaders. Can you imagine growing up immersed in that? It had to shape how you saw the world.
Absolutely. And speaking of shaping worldviews, she was born in Nikolaev, in Ukraine, back in the 1880s. And her dad, Rabbi Mir Shlomo Yanovsky, he wasn't just any rabbi. The man was a renowned scholar. So learning, it wasn't just encouraged in her family, it was practically the air they breathed.
It's more than just, books and studying, though. It's this dedication to sharing that knowledge, keeping those traditions alive, vibrant. You see it even when she's a teenager. I mean, picture this. You're so committed to preserving knowledge that you spend your days meticulously copying, transcribing these complex religious discourses. It wasn't a pastime for her. It was about making sure those teachings resonated within her community.
That's a level of devotion you don't see every day, especially at such a young age. It makes you think.
Yeah.
But we can't talk about her world without mentioning her marriage in 1900 to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneerson. Talk about a power couple.
Right. I mean, they end up in Yekaterinoslav, a city brimming with life, and it had this very diverse Jewish community. Don't forget, this is the early 1900s. Massive social and political upheaval. Being a rabbi then, it wasn't just about, leading a congregation. It was navigating uncharted waters, being a bridge between these ancient traditions and the rapidly modernizing world closing in around them.
And that's where Rebbetzin Chana steps in, right? Her influence, it's impossible to miss. The biography makes it clear she wasn't just Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's wife. She was his partner in every sense of the word. She spoke God knows how many languages fluently and could connect with everyone, especially, it seems, the younger generation who might have felt that disconnect.
Think about it. A community wrestling with so much change. And here's this woman who not only gets their traditions, but speaks their language, literally and figuratively. That's leadership, even if it's not, the kind you read about in history books. Impactful nonetheless.
It really makes you think about, the courage it took to just keep going, knowing that everything could change in an instant. And sadly, for the Schneersons, things were about to get a whole lot tougher.
It's true. You can feel the mood shift, as we move into the late 1930s. It's almost like the sense of dread hanging over everything. You have to remember the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, their presence. It was everywhere.
And in 1939, that fear, it becomes all too real. The biography, it paints this chilling picture. It's 3:00 in the morning and the Schneerson home is raided. NKVD agents, they're tearing the place apart, looking for anything at all to use against Rabbi Levi Yitzchak.
It just goes to show you, right? Even the most basic expressions of faith were seen as threats. And that's exactly what they use against him. They arrest him, accusing him of anti-Soviet activities.
Anti-Soviet activities meaning?
Leading prayers, teaching Torah, even preparing matzah for Passover.
It's unbelievable. But in the face of all that, Rebbetzin Chana, she's something else. 59 years old, her whole world turned upside down. And what does she do? She springs into action.
She throws herself into this campaign to get her husband freed. Imagine, right, facing down this bureaucratic nightmare, this wall of indifference, even hostility. But her determination never wavered.
And after months of this agonizing uncertainty, she finally finds out what's happened to him. 5 years of exile. 5 years in a place called Chili, Kazakhstan.
Think about that. The sheer distance, the unknown dangers. It was as remote and as harsh as it gets.
And she doesn't even hesitate. She gathers the few belongings they allowed her to take with her, including, and this really stuck with me, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's tallit and tefillin, essential for prayer. And she sets off on this journey to join him, a 5-day train ride under normal circumstances.
And these are far from normal circumstances, I imagine.
Exactly. And then she gets to Chile, and what does she find? They're given one room, no door, damp, mosquitoes everywhere. They even had to share it with a Tatar family. The poverty, the lack of even the most basic comforts, is hard to wrap your head around.
And yet, right in the middle of all that, what were they worried about? Other people.
Yeah.
Rebbetzin Chana writes about how much joy it gave her husband to have ink and paper so he could study, even more than having enough food.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And of course, she made sure he had those things. Can you imagine scouring this remote village for scraps of paper, looking for herbs she could use to make ink, just so he could continue his studies? That's more than just devotion.
It was recognizing that his life's work, his scholarship, it was a lifeline, a source of light in the darkness.
And it's not like they were focused only on themselves. We're talking about the middle of World War II. Their little corner of Kazakhstan, it became a refuge for others fleeing the conflict.
Families torn apart, fear everywhere you looked. It's hard to fathom.
It makes you feel, well, almost overwhelmed just thinking about it, doesn't it? All that suffering. But even with so little, they shared what they had. Comfort, advice, whatever scraps of food they could spare.
There's this story in the biography. It's small, but it really stayed with me. It's the winter of '42, a brutal one from what they say. And Rebbetzin Chana, she gets terribly sick. High fever, weak. She was all alone. And you know what she's worried about?
What's that?
Burdening other people. She's more concerned with that than with her own well-being.
It's remarkable.
Luckily, someone realizes what's happening, and she eventually receives help. But it just goes to show you, right? Even then, her first thought was for someone else.
It's almost, I don't know, impossible to imagine, isn't it?
Yeah.
Going through all that. You'd think surviving exile in conditions like that would be enough.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't the end for them, was it?
It wasn't. You know, it makes you think about resilience. And I don't mean just physically, but something deeper.
Right.
So as Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's sentence, those 5 years as it's coming to an end, his health, it takes a turn for the worse.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He's released in 1944. They moved to Alma Ata, hoping for a bit of a reprieve.
A chance to catch their breath.
Exactly. But it wasn't meant to be. Those years, the toll they took, the deprivation, the constant struggle.
It's a reminder that freedom, even when you have it, it doesn't erase everything, does it?
No, it doesn't. And yet, you see, even then, with his health declining, their focus was still outward. I mean, there are accounts of Rebbetzin Chana in those final months of her husband's life, still opening her home, anyone in need.
That's incredible.
Offering comfort, a kind word, just a moment of peace in the middle of all that darkness.
You have to wonder, where did that strength come from? To keep caring for others when her own world was, when it was falling apart.
It's faith, isn't it? That belief that goes beyond the physical realities. And don't forget, at this point, she still hadn't seen her son, Menachem Mendel. Not in 2 decades.
It's hard to even imagine that.
Yeah.
That longing, the not knowing.
Unimaginable. And yet, when Rabbi Levi Yitzchak passes away in '44, she finds this wellspring of strength. She goes back to Moscow. Think about that journey in those chaotic post-war years. Alone.
Just getting by must have been a feat in itself.
Absolutely. She lives in hiding, constantly moving, looking over her shoulder for almost 2 years, and all she wants is to be reunited with her son.
2 years. It's hard to fathom.
And finally, she manages to escape Soviet Russia in 1946. It took a network of incredibly brave people, but she did it.
They must have been risking their own lives.
They were, and she makes her way to Paris, and that's where it happens, where she finally sees Menachem Mendel after 20 years. 20 years.
What a moment. Joyous and heartbreaking, I imagine. And to think that's not even the end of her story.
No. Paris, it was really just the beginning of another chapter. She eventually comes to New York. Family, a community that embraced her.
Finally, some peace.
She found a new sense of purpose there. Her son, of course, becomes their Rebbe, leader of the Shabbat Lubavitch movement, which had to be, well, a source of tremendous pride.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's what you said earlier, isn't it? About her focus on the individual. That never went away. That connection, offering a kind word, listening, it's like a quiet reminder. Even the grand scheme of things, it's those individual moments that really matter.
And that's her legacy. You see it in everything she did, from those early days, meticulously copying those religious texts, to her later years, offering comfort and support to anyone who needed it. Rebbetzin Chana Schneerson's life, it really makes you think. It makes you realize that every act of kindness, every connection, it makes a difference.
And her impact, it goes way beyond, well, beyond institutions, doesn't it? It's in the lives she touched.
It's in the example she set. And that brings us to Kiran Chana, doesn't it?
An organization named in her honor.
Carrying on those values that were so important to her.
It feels right somehow. A fitting tribute.
It does. So as we finish this deep dive into Rebbetzin Chana Schneerson's life, her story, well, it makes you think, doesn't it? About resilience, about faith, about compassion, even in the darkest of times.